Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the live stream. Now, this is our climate change special. Well, it's climate change special part one. I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. First of all, apologies for the mess in the background. We're having so many things delivered, ready for the conference. We've run out of places to keep them. I mean, if you think this is messy, wait until you see it next week, because there's going to be a big delivery tomorrow. So in the live stream next week, you'll probably see nothing but cardboard boxes in the background. The little book that I've written has been delivered tomorrow, all being well. That's going to be a lot of boxes. But just to show you some of the things that are in those, some of the new leaflets we've got. Can we see that? What's marriage got to do with politics? Abortion, are you sure? Scotland's demographic winter. That's interesting stuff. Gender equality. What about men? Do we value all human life? The 10 Commandments of Scottish education. The 10 bad ideas wrecking our education system. And can a man become a woman? So these leaflets, we're hoping people will look at them and think, oh, I like that. I know someone I would like to give that to. Or if you give them out in the street, it will help people understand what we're about. Also, it might stir up a bit of response as well, because some of them are very controversial, some of them are less controversial. But anyway, they're ready for launch at the conference. Right, let me get the comments up. I'm going to do lots of interacting with the comments today. Just to start off, I will put the link to getting tickets for the conference. So there we are. You can book in right now. So yeah, climate change tonight. Now, we had a climate change expert due to come and speak to me a couple of weeks ago, but he was ill and he's still ill. Unfortunately, he should have been at the COP26 conference at the moment, but he's got coronavirus. So we will catch up with Ben Ritchie in a week or two. But I'm going to have a chat about some climate change issues this evening. Hopefully, you'll make comments as well. I'll be able to bring those in. What I'm going to go through is some of the points I was going to put to Ben Ritchie. Some of the points where, well, you'll see the sort of points I've got. But before I go on to that, I'll say what else I need to show you as well, is the new Scottish Family Party mug we've also had delivered. But unfortunately, it's left-handed. As you can see, this is obviously a left-handed mug, because you need to hold it in your left hand for anyone to see what it says on. So this is the Family Party mug, but you don't see it. Well, I see it, I suppose. So, first thing I thought I'd do would be have a quick look through the Family Party policies that are relevant to environmental issues, etc. Could we have a few? Because the Family Party, our basic idea is filling the void in Scottish politics. Right? Is there a void in Scottish politics? Is there a lack of people talking about climate change? Well, no, not at all. The government's very committed to it. All the parties in the parliament are committed to it. The UK government, Scotland and the UK are world leaders in tackling climate change, trying to reduce carbon emissions. So what can the little Scottish Family Party add to that? We tend to think, well, not much really. So that's not something we're focusing on. We focus on things that the other parties are not talking about. Say, filling the void is our mission. But there are a few things we've got that are relevant to the environment. Let me just tell you about some of them. Right, environment and energy. This is from our policies. The natural beauty of Scotland, its flora and fauna, should be conserved. That's pretty uncontroversial, isn't it? But that's something we place a high value on. Measures to tackle carbon emissions must be practical, sustainable, and carefully costed. I think we've sometimes had the feeling that the government's promising things. Westminster says it will do something by a certain date. So Scotland just says we'll do it 5 years earlier. And, we just hope these things have been thought through carefully and the consequences are there, because it'd be a shame if it turned out that these targets can't be met or it ends up in a bit of a muddle. So we hope things are carefully planned. Debate in this area should be led by expert opinion, accompanied by intelligent analysis, open to diverse views, and not dictated by activists and protesters. Now, I do worry in the whole area of climate change that there is a very vigorous activist protest movement whose views are often, I would say, not particularly balanced. They're often unscientific, I would suggest. And our fear is that in Scotland, sometimes we think government policy has been driven to some extent by appeasing these groups that are not experts. Listening to experts, dealing with experts, intelligent debate, that's great. Some of the campaigning groups are a bit off the wall, and we worry that they're having undue influence. Anyway, another one. Every means of energy generation should be considered on its merits and non-dismissed on ideological grounds. Now, you can probably read between the lines what we're getting at there, can't you? We're basically saying, if climate change is this existential threat, that there could be mass starvations, I mean, the world becoming somewhere towards uninhabitable, a calamity of the highest possible proportions, right? If you've got a means of generating electricity that doesn't produce any carbon emissions, like nuclear power, and it produces electricity on a huge scale, and if you do it right, relatively cheaply, then surely that's something that should be looked at. I'll talk about this a bit more later. I think it sort of underlines the credibility of, say, the Green Party when they say we're all doomed. Nuclear power could help solve the problem, but no, we don't like that because it generates nuclear waste. Surely, if you're really thinking the planet's doomed, you're going to look at any option to reduce carbon emissions. So when they say, "Oh no, we don't like nuclear," but we're not bothered enough about carbon emissions to want nuclear power. Well, it doesn't really hang together for me. I think that undermines the credibility of the case. So we would be open to looking at all energy generation methods. There are 2 nuclear power stations in Scotland, of course, you're probably aware. There's 2 nuclear power stations, 1 gas-fired power station up in Peterhead, and the rest of it is renewable. But I'll talk about that later. We'll get to that later. Right, transport. While cheap and efficient public transport is desirable, car use is the only practical option in many cases, particularly for families and in rural areas. Government policy should make provision for ongoing affordable car use. Sometimes think, for example, in the Green Party, a lot of young single people living in cities, anti-car, let's have public transport. But if you're going to drop your kid off at nursery, take the other one round to school, then go off to work and pick them up, family life on public transport can be pretty challenging, particularly with a bigger family, especially in rural areas. So there needs to be provision for car use in whatever steps are taken. That's our policy. Safe cycleways should be extended by integration into the pavement areas where that's possible. I think as a family policy, cycle lanes particularly not that helpful. Cycle paths, or if you can cycle on the pavement, that is very helpful. That means you really can go for your family bike ride. So that's something we would support. I mean, the way they've been doing it in Edinburgh, just putting cones up, making huge wide cycle lanes left, right, and centre. Is that a good thing? Well, we'll talk about that more in the council election campaign. I mean, my feeling is that they put bollards up to make a cycle lane for you in the part of the road where you don't need a cycle lane. I mean, when you're on your bike, I cycle a lot. When you're on your bike, what's the place where you're in a bit of danger? It's where you have to turn, or you get to the traffic lights, or you get to a roundabout. That's the dangerous bit. But the cycle lanes don't help you there. They just have these bollards to protect you on the straight bits of road. Anyway, we'll talk about that more next year. We would explore the potential of river transport on some of Scotland's great waterways. Some experts are of the view that the waterways of Scotland could be used for more transportation, and it would be a good move to explore that. So we would explore it. We're not saying it would work. We're saying we would explore it. It's something that's worth looking at. Fill in the void. None of the other parties are suggesting that particularly. We would have a look at that. 2 more things. One is, as I said in the video, marriage. I mean, if you promote family stability, that reduces the number of households that people are living in, and therefore you need less energy to heat them. Therefore, you save on carbon emissions. So the Green Party should be copying the Scottish Family Party and being a pro-marriage party if they were serious about tackling climate change. Of course, they would never dream of doing that because they've got a cause higher than climate change, and that is their liberal progressive values, which means they couldn't possibly try to promote family stability through promoting marriage. So their progressive values come first. Tackling the climate crisis comes second to them. But for us to say family stability would be a good thing for the environment as well. Last thing, higher education. Our policy is that universities should offer a degree of common qualifications across universities. So if you're living, in Inverness, let's say, and you want to do a degree in mechanical engineering, and the best course is in Edinburgh, or maybe you think the best course is in Cambridge, or who knows where, you think if you could get in there, you could really show them what you can do. But if you could sit the same exams anywhere, or a component was common, you could think, oh, I'll go to the University of Highlands and Islands, and I can still get qualifications that show I'm just as good as someone who's gone to Edinburgh or St Andrews or Cambridge or whatever. So I don't need to go and live miles away. Because what often happens with university is people go off to university, and that sort of severs the link with home to some extent. Then when they get a job, they move who knows where. Those move to anywhere in the country. And then they find themselves living a long way away from the rest of the family, which has got implications for family life, but also it involves a lot of traveling backwards and forwards, which is not good for the environment. So our higher education policy is designed to give students the option of staying closer to home with university, which will probably result in them living closer to home through their life. So that's our thinking there. Yeah, so that's some of our policies. What have we got in the comments here? Did I see the video of Joe Biden going to sleep at the conference? I did indeed. I actually put it on Twitter. I said, no one's going to fall asleep at the Scottish Family Party conference. That's for sure. Right. Interesting point. Flown in rather than Zoom. Yeah, something like 400, where are we? 200 to 400 private jet flights into Glasgow for COP26, which is a massive, massive amount of carbon emissions. I mean, private jets are about one of the worst things you can have for climate change. So yeah, these are very relevant issues, because steps to tackle climate change, ultimately they affect everyone. So anyone proposing them has got to show that they're willing to pay that price themselves before they suggest it be inflicted on everyone else through government policy, I would suggest. But it's not at all clear that that is taking place. Right. Okay. Let's go down through more comments. Right, Greta Thunberg. I was going to talk about Greta. I'll talk about Greta now. I feel Greta Thunberg undermines the environmentalist cause, because what's obviously happened is that the media have latched onto her and decided to make her into an international celebrity. I don't believe that there's any personal qualities that she possesses that have won her this audience. It's that the media have thought, all right, this is convenient. This is the sort of person we want to push forward and make into a celebrity. Now, she's obviously got no particular expertise in the area. So for someone like that to be at the forefront of the campaign, to my mind, it undermines the credibility of the case. But it seems a lot of people take the opposite view. Add me on live. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, onto the thing. Right, we'll see. Maybe. Well, that's interesting. Using canals again, get them back in action. There was talk of a transport service on the canal in Edinburgh at one point. Some sort of, you wouldn't call it a bus, some sort of boat in any case, transporting people along the canal. But yeah, interesting. Interesting. Do you believe there is a climate crisis? We'll come to that in a minute. We'll get going. Let's just look through the comments. Right, what's that? The one about women living longer. I think that's on another topic. I'll look at that one later. Right. Now, what I'm going to go through now is go through some of the points I'm going to discuss with Ben Ritchie. It will be a couple of weeks' time, 2 or 3 weeks' time now. But these are some of the points I'm going to put to him. So I'll send this to him. I'll say, if you want to do a bit of preparation, this is what's up my sleeve. Right. So what would I have to say about climate change? The first thing I would say is that, as with so many political issues, it's become very polarized, and that there's people that I would say quite extreme views at either end, And that tends to be the pattern with political issues these days, particularly for people who follow politics in America. That seems to have a polarizing effect. Now, when you've got some people in the extreme over here, some people at an extreme over here, it's tempting to say, oh, well, the wise, the correct position must be somewhere in the middle. That's where sensible people must be. And that's called the fallacy of moderation, because that's just not true. If there's some people at this extreme, some people at this extreme, and some people in the middle, it might be the people at this extreme are right. It might be the people at this extreme are right. It might be the people in the middle who are right. There's no principle that says the people in the middle are right. But having said that, you might end up thinking I'm a sort of somewhere in the middle with this. So the climate. I think the climate of the Earth is an extremely complex system with countless variables and interactions the scientists understand to some degree, but I suspect a lot of it they don't particularly understand very well. So I find with climate change, when I hear people making the case, I always think, I don't understand it. I don't know enough about climate science to be able to judge how good that argument is. It's a bit like if you imagine, you know the Higgs boson, this thing that they discovered, I don't know, it was about 5 or 10 years ago. Now, this sort of subatomic particle that they thought they detected evidence for. Now, if someone tried to convince me that the Higgs boson existed, they could present their argument, but I wouldn't understand it. I don't know enough maths and physics to be able to understand the argument that they'd be making. So if someone argued against it, I wouldn't be able to understand their argument either, probably. So I'd just be left helpless. But in that case, I tend to go with what the majority of scientists were saying, because I think there's no reason, I don't think, why people would be like making up anything about the Higgs boson. So with climate change, when I hear people arguing and presenting evidence, I'm generally not really convinced. I don't really understand. I can't really assess it. When people argue against it, I don't feel I can really assess that either. Now, one thing that happens sometimes is people present statistics. They say, oh, look at the statistics for the ice here or the temperature here or the sea level here or whatever. And I always look at the statistics and think, oh, that doesn't convince me. That's over that period of time. What about over a longer period of time? Okay, that's it in that place. What about another place? Okay, that's one number, but there's countless other things you could measure as well. Okay, it's been going up then, but who's to say it's going to carry on going up? Maybe it's been going up and down or whatever. So I always think, I need to know more. I need to know more. So I feel that when people present statistics saying that climate change, there's a crisis, and I feel the same as well when people try and present statistics to say, look, it's not such a big deal. So I feel a bit ill-equipped with that. Now, with science, my opinion, my stance usually is that I'm quite trusting of science. I'm not a scientist, but I think I sort of understand how it works. I'm pretty confident in the scientific method and the results the scientists come to, usually. But I'm more confident in some areas than others. Let's say, if you imagine the scientists said, an astrophysicist said, there's a meteor coming to hit the Earth, and it's going to hit in 2 weeks' time, and it's going to hit in Edinburgh. That's what we've worked out. That's what's going to happen. I would be extremely worried, because I think astrophysicists really know how to calculate where meteors are going to go, because it's a very precise, mathematical, well-understood area of science. And I would be panicking. I would think that's going to happen. That is going to happen, definitely. But with climate science, it's a different sort of science. Now, if you imagine science in terms of what you do in a laboratory, you do an experiment, you get your results, and if it fits your theory and you end up saying, this seems to be the way the world is, this theory is true. And then some of your colleagues do the same experiment, and someone in another country does the same experiment in their laboratory. And eventually the scientific world says, that really is what happens. That's the effect. And we think that theory explains it best. So yeah, we'll go with that. I mean, that's sort of experimental science. But I would say the further you go away from that, the less confident I am in science. So if the scientists are trying to work out what happened in the past, then that's not science in the same sense. They're still very clever people using the best information available to make very good arguments about what happened. But also when it comes to looking into the future, particularly the Earth's climate, the same applies. You obviously can't put the Earth on your laboratory desk and do experiments on it. It's predictions, it's trying to theorize about very, very complex systems. So it's the sort of science where I think there's more room for it to go wrong a little bit. There's more room for there to be genuine mistakes and differences of opinion within it. So that affects my confidence a little bit from the predictions I hear from scientists. I'll come to some comments in a minute. So I gave myself a score on a couple of things. How serious do I think the consequences of climate change were going to be? And how confident am I in the scientists' predictions? Well, for the seriousness, some people are saying extinction, human extinction. Some people are saying nothing to worry about. It'll just, we'll have nicer weather on holiday. Where would I be on that scale? I would say I'd be about 5. Right. On the confidence scale, if it's 0, I don't trust the scientists at all. They haven't got a clue. They're making it all up. I've got no confidence. That would be 0. If 10 was, I think that they're going to be absolutely right. I think what they say is spot on. I'd be a 5 or 6, maybe a 5 or 6, somewhere in the middle. So overall, I say that's a sort of intermediate position. If there's an asteroid hitting the world, I would trust them very much more than predicting what's going to happen with the climate. Because with the climate, even if they can predict a temperature increase, how easy is it to predict the consequences of that? I think that must be very, very difficult. So I'm not particularly confident in what they're doing. So in 20 years' time, what do I expect? Do I expect mass extinctions, the waves lapping at my front door? Or do I expect that there'll be people saying either it's still yet to happen, it's still the same, we've just delayed it, or saying, wow, that was a bit of a panic, but it hasn't really happened? What would I expect? My gut feeling is more towards, we'll look back thinking, well, that was maybe a bit over the top. That's my gut feeling. What's a gut feeling worth in science? Nothing really. But just from my consideration of it, that's what I tend to think. But if you think the risk of something so appalling, even if you think the risk is not high, you're still going to take drastic measures to try and deal with it, haven't you? Like if there's a 10% chance someone was going to come round and shoot you tonight, you wouldn't think, oh, it's only 10%. Don't worry about that. I'll just, watch a film and go to bed. No, you'd think, right, I'm going to do something about this. So even though I'm on balance, I'm tending to imagine, I'm not tending to foresee catastrophe. Still, if there's a small chance, then it's something to take very seriously. Right, let's have a look at some comments. Charles Wright, Thomas Malthus 300 years ago said we'd all die of starvation. 1968, Professor Ehrlich said there was going to be mass starvation. Prophets have usually been wrong. Yes, there have been a lot of predictions made in lots of ways, doomsday predictions about the Earth, about running out of food, about cooling, warming, and all sorts of other things that haven't, and things like acid rain. When I was at school, they introduced a new subject called environmental studies. And the main message in it, and in geography as well, was we're going to run out of oil. So they were saying to us as teenagers, when you're adults, there's going to be an absolute crisis because oil is going to run out and like the world's economy is going to grind to a halt. You're not going to be able to travel around. You're going to be back to living in caves. Well, it wasn't saying that, but they were saying, major crisis for humanity is looming on the horizon. Well, they're completely wrong because they've just discovered more and more oil reserves. There is no shortage of oil for the foreseeable future, and it's now moved to a completely different issue. So I think if you've been through that experience, it does tend to temper your confidence in the environmental scientists there. So yeah, I think that's a good point. I would say with these predictions, though, okay, people have got predictions right. With climate change predictions, I mean, there have been lots of sophisticated models have been used, and they test them against reality. So they'll come up with a prediction, then they'll see how that goes for the next 10 years. If that one seemed to be going really well, they might say, well, let's see how it does for the next 20 years, and then it might do well for the next 20 years. Then they might be saying, oh, this one seems to be the one that works well. But I also think maybe they're sort of always tweaking them. They're always making them better, so they think. by taking into account more things. And that can become a bit of a strange game for scientists, where you're constantly changing your model and comparing it with what happens. But you sort of can't go wrong if you do that. It's not like, in a laboratory where you can repeat things. I don't know, it's a sort of different sort of process. And I think it's possible to see how they could make the mistake of feeling a prediction method, a formula or whatever was being successful, whereas actually it just happened to be successful over a short period with a few tweaks, etc. But so overall, Sam, I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying it's not an area of science where I think I would be entirely confident in what they're saying. Anyway, right, yeah, that's an interesting comment. Right, a hoax. Now, I would say a hoax is something deliberately perpetrated. So a hoax is basically a lie told in order to produce some sort of effect. I would say with climate change that the scientists and most of the activists and the politicians, they genuinely believe it. They genuinely believe it. So I think that would mean it wouldn't be classified as a hoax. Now, in terms of an agenda, I think any issue in politics, politicians will try and use it to further their own agenda, their own end. I'll talk about that in a minute. And that happens with climate change for sure. And I think that's why it's become such a politicized issue. And if you're a Green Party, environmental activists and Green parties, they existed before climate change. But climate change comes along, and that really is the gift for you as a Green Party, isn't it? That's just your perfect issue. And if you're the Green Party, it's in your interest to exaggerate the danger to the greatest possible degree, because the more catastrophic you make it sound, the more people are likely to vote for you. That's a pretty straightforward relationship. And so the Greens know that. I think it influences the other parties as well. If they feel threatened by the Greens, they feel, well, we need to, be having equally cataclysmic language in order to stop too many people going over to the Greens. So objectivity starts to be undermined when you've got that politicization coming in. But people could say to the family party, they could say it's in your interest to try and exaggerate the impact of family instability and that sort of thing. Whereas really, it's not that big a deal, but because you're trying to make political capital out of it, you're exaggerating, which is the temptation. But I would say we don't. We resist that temptation, but I'm not sure other parties do. I mean, climate change has become definitely a sort of left-wing issue, hasn't it? Which is a bit curious. Why would that be? I mean, if there's a meteor coming to hit the Earth, would it be that the left-wing parties saying, "Oh, we've got to do something," and the right-wing saying, "Oh, don't worry about it"? To be honest, I don't think it would. I don't think it would. If we needed to cooperate to make some big missile or something to shoot some meteor that was heading to Earth, I don't think it would be the left that were particularly focusing on it. I think that would be cross-political. I think. What do you think? That's an interesting question. The other thing with climate change, who are the polluters? It's big business. So people on the left quite like it can be a sort of anti-capitalist, anti-business tie-in as well. And also, people on the left of politics tend to be internationalists. They want international action, international cooperation. They don't really like strong nation states, patriotic nation states. So climate change obviously needs international action. So for people of an internationalist bent, they're going to be drawn to that. They're going to quite like that. Now, the fact that people have got a reason to enjoy talking about climate change doesn't mean that it's not true at all. But it's just, I'm trying to think about why it seems to be an issue more associated with the left of politics. Yeah, so there's the temptation to exaggerate. Right, Rachel, let me just try and take that comment off. The other thing I find with the politicization, I'm very wary of the fact that it always seems to be, there's 10 years to sort this out, 10 years. I tend to think that's quite politically convenient. If you say, right, there's 1 year, what's everyone think? Everyone thinks, well, no point. We've had it. I mean, not going to happen. If they say 3 years, well, that's a bit the same, really. I mean, the governments are elected. They're going to do what they do. I mean, what can we do about it? If you say 10 years, that's like saying the next election, that's the one. At the next election, you have to vote, I don't know, Democrat, Green, whoever. So in terms of exerting political leverage, we've got 10 years to sort this out. It seems a bit too convenient to me, a bit too convenient. If it was 20 years, people would think, oh, well, let's forget about it for 10 years and then have a go at looking at it. So this 10 years seems quite psychologically convenient. So I'm not that confident that when I hear people say that that's scientifically based. I think it might be based on campaigning considerations rather than the science. I say the other thing, once it becomes politicized, then you've got a section of the political world who it's in their interest to be the doom mongers. And I think that's what we've got going on to some extent. The other thing I find with climate change is when you hear politicians talking about it, there's always this balance between doom and hope. So, yeah, there could be, the worst possible catastrophe, but there's hope. And I think, again, is that based in the facts? Or is that just, if you're a politician, that's the most powerful message? Really terrify people, because that will motivate them to action. But you don't want to be seen as negative. So if you present yourself as a hopeful, positive person, then that's the ideal package to present to the public. So sometimes when I hear that balance, I think, again, I'm not sure how much objectivity there is behind that. I mean, if you're a politician who just said, maybe it's hopeless, going to happen, nothing we can do. I mean, who's going to vote for you saying that? So I think there are strong factors influencing the way people speak about these things. Right, let's see what we've got. Right, we've got that, haven't we? This. Yes, have a look. They're right. Right. Climate change is a special risk because only governments and global corporations can do anything about it. Therefore, we need to give more money, more influence, and power to these corporations. Yes. Yeah, I think that is the sort of line the people on the left of, well, corporations. See, corporations are a funny one. Because you think people on the left of politics would want more power for the government, but less to businesses. But has the balance shifted with sort of global corporatism? Are the businesses now part of the establishment, and that they see themselves as allies? But yeah, that's an interesting point. Sure, social scientists tell us that population decline will cause economic decline on a large scale. That message has not been listened to. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. Because a lot of people now are saying they're not having kids because they're worried about climate change. Whereas population decline in the world is a very serious issue. And it could cause problems on a global scale in terms of economic problems, which result in, food, it could result in political instability as well. So population decline is forecast by a lot of people to be a major problem in the future. But at the moment, no other problems can get a look in because climate change sort of dominates the agenda. So these people not having children because of climate change, they're very possibly contributing to what's going to be a major global crisis in the decades to come. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, of course, yeah. Justin Welby today, the Archbishop of Canterbury, said basically that to the world leaders, they said, if you just make the right decisions on climate change, that's all that matters. Basically, you'll have done a good job. It doesn't matter what else you've done. It doesn't matter what your other policies are. If you just get it right on climate change, you've done a good job. I thought, excuse me, that is just crazy. That's a terrible thing to say. To basically say you could be absolved of any sin. Doesn't matter what else you've done. There's millions of babies being aborted. That doesn't matter as long as you make the right decisions on climate change. I mean, who do you think? I mean, just say about the Archbishop of Canterbury. I don't really follow what he says very much. But remember when he was appointed, there was quite a lot of excitement within the church. People saying, oh, it's fantastic. We've got one of our people in the top job as Archbishop of Canterbury. You just wait and see what happens now. He's going to be a really strong voice on our side. And look what happens. And I've heard that so many times. Oh, so there's this Christian and they've got in this really senior position. Oh, this is fantastic. You just wait and see what they do. Wait and see what their influence is there. And then a few years down the line, they've diluted everything. They're not saying anything. They're keeping silent, totally compromised, and no point in them being there. And that's happened again and again and again. So when I hear about it now, I just think, don't even bother telling me that someone's in this senior position now. Tell me when they've done something. Tell me when they've made a difference. Tell me when they've spoken out. That's what I'm interested in. Okay, Sean, it all depends on which scientist is talking. This is why we should not be putting faith in these guys. Take what they say and measure it against what we're seeing. Yeah, I would say, yeah, there is diversity of opinion within scientists. The activists try and present the view the scientists say. Okay, the UN climate change panel, I mean, they do produce reports, but even within that panel, there's quite significant disagreement among them. I was seeing something today. I mean, some of them think the temperature rise might be 2 or 3 degrees. Some of them think it would be 1.5. You know, quite a spectrum. I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a minute. So scientific opinion does vary. That doesn't mean that there's not a core of consensus within it. I think on any issue, you'll always find some professor somewhere who will take the unorthodox view. On absolutely anything, you'll find someone with the unorthodox view. So the fact that there exists scientists who take the other view, you wouldn't put too much store by that. But I think within, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, even within the current batch of climate scientists, there is significant variation. In terms of measuring against what we're seeing, yeah, I think measuring predictions against reality, because there have been a lot of predictions of imminent disaster in terms of sea level rise, ice melting or whatever, that haven't happened within the time scale that they were predicted to. And that is certainly the case. So when I was 17 where I live, supposed to be underwater, 57 now, there's no change. Yeah, that's just like we were saying, isn't it? Yeah. And people who are campaigning about climate change, they've got to realize that that's happening, that there have been these apocalyptic predictions made that haven't come to pass. Yeah, that's a fair point. Right, just looking at the comments. Let's see. I mean, China and India, absolutely. They're a huge factor. So really what Scotland does in the grand scheme of things, not going to make a lot of difference. I do think if we're talking about averting catastrophe, what Scotland does is fairly insignificant. India and China are not particularly open to adopting the sort of targets that the climate change scientists would like them to do. So they're basically not going to do it. So I would have thought in the light of that there would be more governments and more people saying, look, China and India are not going to do it. So we've got to start preparing for the worst. So we need to start building sea defenses, and we need to be thinking about what crops we're going to grow, and we need to be making preparations of various sorts for what's to come. Now, that is happening. I'm not saying that's not happening. That has been looked at to some extent. But surely that should be higher up the agenda. If people really think that this calamity is going to come about, because things are not looking promising at all from India and China. So if people are really expecting that, which it seems reasonable, then you'd be planning very seriously for mitigation strategies. But it doesn't seem to be happening. I find that slightly confusing. Right, lots of comments here. I'll get back to my script in a minute. Right, climate change activism has been abused to cause division, almost itself become a religion. I would certainly say that it's taken on religious qualities. I would say that with the whole, some people don't like me using this, with this whole sort of woke agenda, it does become like a religion. I think in America, right-wing politics becomes like a religion as well. And a lot of Christians in America confuse their right-wing views with their Christianity and think it's all part of the same package. I was in America a few years ago. There was this sign for sale in a shop. It said, "You'll never take my Bible or my gun." And that's quite an interesting juxtaposition there. So yeah, I think it does take on religious elements. It's a shame this has occurred, as climate change may be the issue that we as humans cannot deal with, rather prevent its sooner arrival. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you, Rachel. Right. Let's let me go back to my script. Let's do a bit more. Thanks for the comments. Talked about that. Now, the economic harm of carbon reduction strategies needs to be a very serious consideration as well. Because if you listen to green parties or people really sort of towards the extreme of that, their line is, you just could reduce carbon emissions. Who cares about the consequences? We don't care about economic growth. If the economy shrinks, well, that's probably good. We'll all be nicer and kinder, and it'll be lovely if we're like getting back to nature instead of having an industrialized economy. Now, I think we're pretty used to living a comfortable, safe, relatively healthy life. And that's precarious. That's precarious. It's delicate. There's a huge number of very sophisticated systems, man-made systems, that operate in synchronicity that allow that to happen. And if we start messing with them and damage them drastically, then that's going to cause problems on who knows what scale. Because currently economic growth has lifted millions, if not billions, of people out of poverty over the last decades. Huge, huge progress, far beyond anything charity work has ever done. So the number of people in poverty in the world is far lower than it was, say, decades ago. But so when looking at climate change measures, it's not just the climate that's a consideration. It may be that the cure is worse than the disease. Now, you may look at the most catastrophic climate change predictions and just think, well, nothing will be worse than that. You've got to do anything to avoid that. Well, yeah, there can be some pretty catastrophic things can happen as well through economic collapse and political instability, etc. So there does need to be a balance struck. Because in terms of what you do, if you're looking at making a change, that one policy is not going to result in catastrophe or not. So you need to weigh up its tiny influence on the big picture of the climate with the effect it might have within a country, within a continent as well. So these things do need balancing up. Right, nuclear power. I've talked about that a little bit already. I think, like the Greens, for example, they shoot themselves in the foot. We're facing extinction. Oh, why don't you use nuclear power then? Oh, no, we don't like that one because it generates a small amount of waste that's quite difficult to deal with. If you're facing, extinction, then you clutch at any rope offered to you, and you would look at any possible strategy. So the fact that apparently, I heard today that like the nuclear power industry lobby or whatever were not allowed to go to the COP26 conference. I heard that. I haven't seen that from an official source. But if that's true, I think that's just ridiculous. And again, it makes me think, if someone says, the planet is going to be virtually uninhabitable in 100 years, but no, I don't want to use nuclear power because I don't like that, then I would say, do you really believe that? Or are your principles so high that you'd rather stick to your principles and not use nuclear power rather than avoid global catastrophe? That's a pretty difficult position to sustain, isn't it? Now, nuclear power can be cheap if it's done on a large scale. In Britain, they tend to be one-off designs. It doesn't tend to be done in a very efficient way. But there's new nuclear power plants available now, though. These things that you can put them on the back of a truck. I think Rolls-Royce are involved in them. So you can have them distributed around the country. very responsive, manageable, very cost effective. And I understand that a lot of money has been invested in research in these. I think Britain is at the forefront. And I would see that as a fantastic solution to climate change, well, or part of a solution to climate change. That's one of the things where the downside is not really huge from it. Okay, nuclear waste, people say how dangerous it is, but we've been dealing with it for decades perfectly safely. Okay, it's not ideal. You'd rather it didn't produce nuclear waste, but it can be dealt with. And in terms of the problem dealing with nuclear waste compared to like extinction catastrophe is pretty trivial. Pretty trivial. I mean, just to go back to my meteor coming to hit the Earth analogy. Imagine there was an asteroid coming to hit the Earth, and the scientists, engineers said, look, the only hope, Earth's going to be like destroyed, all life's going to be destroyed, but we can fire this rocket up and stop it hitting the Earth. But we need to fire the rocket from this point here in Scotland. That's got to be the point we fire it. If someone came and said, oh, well, no, you can't do it there. That's the nesting site of the lesser spotted reed warbler or something. You couldn't possibly launch it from there. The world's just going to have to end. The meteor's going to have to strike. You'd say, what? I mean, all the reed warblers are dead in any case if we don't fire this rocket. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So people who are concerned about climate change and won't consider nuclear power, I'm not sure that really holds together. I mean, there's lots of new technologies being explored as well in terms of energy generation. Some of them are quite promising. I think investing in that, in innovation, is a good move. Right, let's have a look at a few comments. Right. Deception to promote an agenda. I think people will use anything to promote their agenda. But I think that's different from saying that the whole thing has been created as a sort of subterfuge in order to promote an agenda through it. I think that's quite an important distinction. Same with coronavirus. I mean, political parties, political leaders have used coronavirus to try and advance their agenda in various ways, very definitely. But that's a long way from saying political leaders planned and caused coronavirus on purpose in order to advance an agenda. I suppose that's somewhere between there is the line between, the line you go over it and you're going into sort of incredible conspiracy theories. Right, let's stand up for the reed warbler, the lesser spotted reed warbler. Absolutely. Right, how are we doing? A few minutes left. Let's keep going. You've probably heard the Scottish government saying that they generate 97% of Scotland's electricity needs are generated by renewable energy. Okay, what does Mr. Average in Scotland think about that? They think, 97% of the energy of the electricity that we use is generated at wind farms and hydroelectric. It's renewable. That's really amazing. What an achievement. But it's a misleading statistic. I would suggest it's a deliberately misleading statistic. What they mean is Scotland generates more electricity than we need. Basically, we've got lots of wind farms and they generate often, at a lot of times of the day, a lot of days of the year, they generate more electricity than we need. So we sell it to other countries. But basically, when the wind's not blowing, Scotland hasn't got enough electricity. Okay, we've got the two nuclears, we've got the gas and the hydro, but it's not enough. So we have to buy electricity from other countries. So we're not self-sufficient in that. So when they say 97%, that means the amount of electrical energy used in Scotland is a certain amount, and the amount of renewable energy generated in the whole year is 97% of that amount. So I hope you're following this. So it's not 97% of the electricity generated. It's not 97% of the electricity used in Scotland. It's a more abstract 97% of the total amount used of that figure is generated by renewable, even though some of it was exported to other countries. It wasn't actually used in Scotland. And I'm sure the Scottish government knows full well that that figure basically tricks people into thinking that they're almost 100% of Scotland's energy is renewable when it's not. Something else I heard saying recently was interesting. Apparently, fossil fuel companies, oil and gas companies, are really keen on renewable energy, wind energy in particular. And the reason is, apparently, is that they know that if you have wind energy, when the wind doesn't blow, you need other fast responding electricity generation methods. And what are they? Fossil fuels. So the more wind farms there are, they're thinking the more there's going to be a need for fossil fuels, so it's going to keep them in business. So people have suggested that's the relationship. Nuclear power apparently isn't as responsive. It takes longer to get a nuclear power station producing electricity. Whereas with, say, gas, a bit like your cooker, probably nothing like your cooker, but you get sort of idea. You turn it on and you get your electricity pretty quickly. So oil and gas companies are tending to say, yep, build your wind farms, absolutely right behind it, fantastic. We'll put pictures of wind farms in our adverts because we know that's going to keep us in business. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. People have talked about the hypocrisy of COP26. I was in Edinburgh the other day. There was a delegation from, I would say it'd be an Arab or Muslim country, judging by the flag. A row of big Mercedes parked outside. I said about all these private jets. I just think, even just from the PR point of view, you would think that they'd be aware and think, well, we obviously can't do this. We need to show willing one way or another. But that doesn't seem to be happening. Right, how about this? Tell me what you think about this in the comments. Here's a potential Scottish Family Party policy to tackle carbon emissions. Jumpers. Personal insulation implements, devices. I mean, do you find, is this true? Tell me if this is true. Is there a trend nowadays for people sitting at home to normally sit in like a shirt or t-shirt rather than wearing a jumper? Is that true? I feel that that's generally the norm now. So would it not be sensible, instead of gluing yourself to the motorway, demanding that people insulate their houses, the government insulates more houses, is there not a place for saying, insulate yourself? Instead of turning the heating up, put a jumper on. I have to say, I don't like to blow my own trumpet and speak about my sainthood very often. But sometimes in the study, when it gets chilly, I put a hat on as well as a jumper or two jumpers rather than put the heating on. So why is that not talked about? Maybe the politicians think, if you imagine a politician came up and said, right, Nicola Sturgeon, people of Scotland, could I urge you to wear an extra layer or two of clothes this winter rather than turning the heating up? What would happen? Would they just be mocked and attacked? I don't know. But it seems to me that's a sensible thing to say. But anyway, that's not family party policy. Right, I will just get towards winding up here. I think with the whole climate change thing, I think there's reason to fear either way. There's reason to fear the consequences of climate change, no matter how confident we are in the predictions that there's, even if we are not particularly confident, there's still reason to fear that they might be right. And there's reason to take action. But there's also reason to fear the potential economic damage and the possible international instability, etc., that could reduce from it, that could flow from it. So I think there's reason to be worried about the years to come. Having said that, does anyone ever remember a time when they were alive when the feeling was, hey, this is a really peaceful and easy, straightforward era we're in at the moment? It seems like the feeling is always that we're in a real time of crisis here. There are threats on all sides. That just seems to be the normal, maybe it's a media narrative, political narrative, but it seems to be the way. Right, I've talked about Justin Welby. Did you hear Boris Johnson's speech at the COP conference? He was talking about James Bond and the countdown to the doomsday device blowing him up or something. It was quite amusing, I thought. But I thought, is that really the tone to take when you're claiming to be talking about something of such monumental gravity? Is that really the way you talk about it? And it just reminded me of a little parable by Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish existential philosopher. And he told a story where a circus was encamped outside a town and it had a fire. this fire was, as fires do, it was burning things. Caravan after caravan was on fire, and it was out of control. So they said, right, we need to send to the town and get people to come and help us. People can get buckets of water or whatever. Right, who's the fastest runner? They chose the fastest runner, and they sent him to the town to get help. But the fastest runner was the clown. So they sent the clown with his silly shoes and his red nose and his makeup on and whatever else. So he went charging into the town square saying, there's a fire, there's a fire, there's a fire. And what happened, of course, everyone just assumed he was joking. People didn't take him seriously because his persona, his appearance, whatever, just that person wasn't associated with speaking really serious messages. So they ignored him. It just reminded me of that when I saw Boris Johnson doing his quite light-hearted speech on the matter. One last thing to mention, schools. I get the General Teaching Council of Scotland magazine because I'm still a member of it. I got it the other day and they're running a course, or someone's running a course on how to help children with like climate terror. Because I think what's been happening in schools for years is even the very youngest children are taught a real climate catastrophe future. And you'll hear recordings of them saying things like, you know, I'm not going to die in old age. We're going to die. We're going to burn up within 20 years, 10 years, 30 years, or whatever. And for a lot of children, that's what they believe. They believe they're not going to live to the old age because they're going to burn because of climate change. Now, even if that was true, that's a terrible thing to be imposing on children. But to be like terrifying children just in order to advance your agenda, like I was saying, because some people, the more terrified people are, the more willing they're going to be to take action, which might be justified if the terror is something real. But to do that to children, I think, is very, very irresponsible. Would we not rather shield children from these serious concerns rather than terrify them for the sake of politicizing them? And I say that's what's been going on in schools, to the point that they're having to sort of train teachers of how to counsel children about their climate change terror. So I think something's gone seriously wrong there. Right, what comments have we got? Councillor was waffling about sacrificing goats. I didn't hear that bit. Okay, yeah, I missed that. Right, I think. Right, so we're here. So more parents need to speak up and educate their children. Don't be afraid to voice your thoughts. If you don't, the current system will. Yeah, parents speaking up. We're very definitely encouraging parents to go to schools and challenge them, withdraw children from aspects of the education, withdraw them from, certainly from sex education or PSHE completely. Yeah, give schools a hard time. Ask them what they're teaching and just say, you know, you feel that doesn't reflect a full spectrum of opinions. I made a video a couple of years ago about a group of, it was the Scottish Children's Parliament, and they'd been got together and they'd made this mural about climate change, and their message was basically that they were thanking the government for passing the Climate Change Act. They were saying it was just so wonderful, and they completely supported the SNP for passing the Climate Change Act. I mean, total indoctrination, politicization of children, completely out of order, and yet it just passes without comment. And yet when you go to the school and say, look, we're not really happy with this, this is not really in line with our values, we don't think this is a good message to be delivering to children, then the response is more like, you know, what planet are you from? You know, what sort of bigot are you? What do you know? You know, we're the experts. So yeah, we hear quite a few stories like that, but it's worth persevering. The other thing I'm hearing again and again is a number of people saying they're homeschooling, or they're looking at setting up independent or unofficial schools, whatever, groups of parents in areas. And I think that's an absolutely positive trend. It's not easy to set up a school or a mini homeschooling, home education collective or whatever. But I think those who are doing it, I admire it. I admire it. Right. That is 10 o'clock. Right, thanks very much for your comments. I'm very much looking forward to speaking to Ben Ritchie, because I'm going to put these points to him, and I'm hoping he will help me to move forward on them. I mean, maybe he'll be able to present a case for climate change that I'll be able to understand, and that will put me on more solid ground. But thanks for watching. Don't forget your conference tickets. In fact, just before we go, I'll just put that on again. It'd be great to see you at the conference and at the dinner afterwards. Right, that's just appeared on Facebook and YouTube. Yeah, if you're on Twitter, just go to our pinned tweet. So it'd be great to see you on the 13th Undone Firmly, and see you next week on the live stream. I think next week we've got, I think it's Anthony Samarov, the libertarian, who's a very interesting thinker. He's been on before. We'll have a very lively chat. We certainly won't agree on everything, but it will be interesting. Right, thanks everyone, and good night.